Hello, welcome again to another version of the Tom and John Show. Glad to have you with us. For those that you might be watching live, welcome, but it's also available in other methods. We have a interesting show today. We're going to go away from the golf course, sort of indirectly, but it's still about turf, and but it's going to focus on tennis as an entity to perform on. Most people that have any interest at all in tennis know about Wimbledon and other grass court circumstances. And Mike Richardson from the University of Arkansas is here, who has taken grass tennis on as a something beyond a hobby. And so we hope you enjoy the program, and I'll turn it back to John.
Okay, thanks. Mike, first, thank you for being here. I'm going to kind of let you give a bio of yourself, but I wanted to give a brief overview. I'm excited to have you. You mentioned that Wimbledon just started this morning, so I'm not sure how many people were going to pull away from watching Wimbledon to come listen to this. I think it makes for an interesting topic today because going to Maidstone last week and discussing it with you when we were in South Africa together, I know you're really into lawn tennis and grass tennis courts, and I know you bring a perspective that most don't know about. So before we turn it over to you and let you kind of tell us a little bit of your background, I'm going to give a 30,000-foot view of your background. So you were born in, I don't know, some podunk town in Louisiana. You told me Homer or something, right? So I don't even know where that is, but North Louisiana. And you went to Louisiana Tech. You had an animal science degree, so I want to hear a little bit about that and your thought process as an undergraduate. But then your master's and your PhD were both in agronomy, master's from Louisiana State University and then University of Georgia for your PhD. And so, again, 30,000-foot view, but welcome. Tell us a little bit more about how you got into it, where you are now.
Well, thanks, John and Tom, for having me this morning, and certainly good to participate in the Tom and John Show. And yeah, my background is a little bit different, but Tom Watchke will probably have an appreciation for this. I consider myself an old school turf scientist. My early interest in my undergraduate degree was in animal science, and then my master's and PhD were both working with forage scientists. And so I worked with a couple of forage physiologists, both at LSU and at Georgia. And as I like to tell my intro to turf management students, the first thing they need to know about their professor is he's never had a class in turfgrass management. So my knowledge of turf has come from the last 20-plus years, almost 25 now, of working on turfgrass systems. But my background and training was really in forages, but my master's degree was on Bermuda grass and my PhD was on tall fescue, so it wasn't a big jump to go over into turf systems and work on that. So been at Arkansas now for almost 19 years, and really enjoyed a very successful time here at Arkansas. It's been a great place to live and work, and but the last few years gotten interested in lawn tennis.
Yeah, and I'll say I went to visit because I wanted to look at some of your shade plots last summer. I was there, and you've done a unique thing at your research plots. Tell us about what you do there.
Well, I tell you what I'll do here. Let me get over here and I'll show you a picture while we're see if I can figure out how to share this screen. What you're looking at there is the All Arkansas Lawn Tennis Club, located here in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We decided after visiting several facilities, both internationally and in Australia and as well as up in the Northeast, that we wanted to see how hard it would be to build a tennis court at our research facility. And really the idea was, as we'll talk about maybe a little more later, was to try to show people how easy or maybe how difficult it was to build and manage a tennis facility. Now, we also had some ulterior motives too, and that was we like to play tennis, and so we thought this would be kind of a cool thing to have at our site. And so, just as a little bit of an overview, I mean, we had literally a weedy Bermuda grass area, Riviera Bermuda grass on our native silt loam soil that we just went in last summer, and I don't think it was in July when we finally started on this. Scalped it down to the ground, started mowing it at about 400 thousandths of an inch, fertilizing it, got a few weeds out of it, and this is what we had by the end of the growing season last year. So to us, it was pretty easy. Now, we started with a nice flat site, but it was pretty amazing how quickly we were able to convert that area into a actual functional lawn tennis court.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm a little disappointed that you have a net back there and you don't have grad students manning the corners to collect the balls when you hit.
Well, yeah, we've talked about trying to encourage some of maybe the undergraduates, especially some of the girls. It'd be kind of fun to have a bunch of girls out there running around on our tennis court chasing balls. But we haven't gone that far yet.
Yeah. So one of the things, obviously, you have an interest in this from a research standpoint, but also from a hobby standpoint too. Give me a history. I don't know anything about lawn tennis and tennis in general. I know there's clay courts and grass courts and hard courts and all kinds of stuff, but tell me about the history of tennis as it relates to grass court.
Well, yeah, I've got a couple of slides here. I'll just share a little bit of information just so make sure I don't forget something. Is that showing up there?
Mm-hmm.
This is an old picture I pulled off of the internet of a Victorian home in the UK somewhere where they had a court set up in their backyard. And really, tennis is one of the oldest sports in the world. It's the historical archives of where it was originally played or originally formed dates back to as early as the 13th century. So a very, very old sport in general. And it really became popular in the 1700s, and really at that time it was all played on grass. And again, it was mainly associated with people that, very wealthy people that had larger estates, that had gardeners on their estate, and they started developing these courts so they could have their friends over and have parties and get out there and play a little lawn tennis. But the modern game of tennis dates back in about the 1870s. That's when they officially established the dimensions of the court, the height of the net, things like that, some basic rules of the game. And so that's basically the sport that we see today. The championship aspect of it is really, most famously, obviously known about Wimbledon. But really, lawn tennis was also the surface or grass was the surface for the U.S. Open and the Australian Open up until really just a few years ago. 1975 was when U.S. Open went to hard courts, and 1988 was when the Aussie Open went from grass to hard court. So the grass tennis has been an important part of the history of tennis, and really early on was the primary surface that was played on. Now, one other thing I want to tell you, John, that you may have seen that this weekend. One of the things that I posted on Twitter this weekend is I wanted my turf friends to tell me the 5 most famous or influential or important turf grass sites in the world, and Wimbledon actually came in second after Augusta National. So even amongst most of my turf friends who are mostly in the golf industry, they all recognize Wimbledon as one of the elite turf grass sites in the world.
You'll probably mention it, but what is the grass on Wimbledon?
Wimbledon is played on ryegrass, and that's I can't remember. I saw Neil Stubley, the grounds manager there, give a talk at the New England Turf Conference a couple of years ago. And I don't remember exactly when they went to ryegrass. Before that, they played on a mixture of bents and poa annua and lots of poa annua, I think, on the court. But they went to pretty much straight perennial ryegrass, I think, about 15 or 20 years ago, and that's the surface they've been playing on ever since. And they're doing some really interesting things there in that they've really utilized this phrase mowing technique. And they basically go in and resurface all of those courts every year. They'll take off the top, 3/4 of an inch or inch of the surface, put down a new thin layer of mix, and then seed ryegrass back into it. And what they found is that by doing that, they have eliminated all the poa annua on those courts, and so they're now pure perennial ryegrass courts.
Nice. They could just spray some Progress.
Yeah, I think they tried that. I don't. I don't think they had. They still weren't able to get ahead of the POA.
Probably don't have the cold enough temperatures going into the winter. I don't know. So Wimbledon's obviously the most famous, right? And you mentioned it that superintendents, even if they look at influential grass sites, Augusta being one and Wimbledon two, and I don't know what the other ones were, but I always think golf, I don't think grass, and I probably wouldn't think Wimbledon because I don't play tennis unless it's on TV, and then I'm like, oh yeah, that's an important aspect. So 1870 something, you know, they had rules and became more official. We've got turfgrass management programs all throughout the country. You've got it at Arkansas, Purdue, wherever they've got them, and we typically focus on golf 1, maybe sports turf 2, and lawn care type stuff. But I don't know if there's any specific management techniques for grass tennis courts. So how are people managing these things? I mean, how do they come up with the idea that?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. You know, I guess my first interest in kind of tennis as a potential research topic, or even an extension activity, or a student training activity, came when I was at the New England a couple of years ago, and they actually have a session at the New England Turf Conference now focused on lawn tennis. And so I sat in on a day of that session, and Neil Stubley was there from Wimbledon, and Mike Burris from Longwood Cricket Club, and several of the other clubs up in New England that have tennis courts. And so I got to talking to these guys and listening to them, and truthfully, it's all really been by apprenticeship over the history of tennis. Is that, you know, places like Wimbledon obviously have been, you know, a leading outlet for information on managing lawn tennis courts, but certainly there are some, you know, managers and groundsmen up in the Northeast right now that are also having very good success managing lawn courts, and they're sharing that information now with each other. But there's really not a lot of research. The New England Turf Association, or New England Turf Foundation, I'm not sure what it's called, but they actually funded a project up at UMass a few years ago to look at just different grasses and, you know, some of the aspects of those grasses in terms of playability and bounce of the ball and, you know, wear tolerance and things like that. I visited UMass and saw that research, and unfortunately they had a couple of years in a row where they established the courts, and then I think it was 13-14 or 14-15 when we had all that winter kill, and they lost, you know, big huge swaths of poa annua or even perennial ryegrass. And so I'm not sure where they are with the research project right now, but to me that's the only research project that I'm aware of that's even going on in the United States right now.
Well, phrase mowing in general, you mentioned that before. That's relatively new. I say relatively new. I mean, the last probably 5 to 10 years, people starting to do that more. I guess I'm wondering what the difference is, and you probably know just by talking to more people and playing tennis, what's the difference in terms of what the surface has to be for tennis and what they do in those situations versus what we would typically think on a golf course or athletic?
Well, you know, probably the first your first tendency would be to look at a tennis court as being a big putting green. I mean, you know, close cut grass, you know, firm surface. You know, that's what you want to do. And in many aspects it is. I mean, you want a smooth, firm surface. Probably the biggest difference between a tennis court and a golf green is the soil under it. Tennis courts, you have to use a native soil or a heavier soil under that court. Let's see if I can go over here. I'll show you another picture where you can kind of see. And if you've watched Wimbledon, you've certainly seen this before, and that is that, you know, you get this intense. Let me see. Did that go? Here we go. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Yeah. So you get this intense wear occurring, you know, along the baseline here, but you know where the players are serving from and where they're playing from the baseline. If this were a sand-based putting green that you were playing on, once that grass wore out, you know what it would look like. You'd be sinking in the sand. The ball wouldn't bounce, and so that's why these courts are primarily built on things like silt loam soil, so that even if the turf wears out, you still have a firm surface there that allows the ball to bounce on.
So obviously, I would imagine that drainage is still an important aspect when you're trying to grow grass. Is it all surface drainage and squeegeeing off, or what do they do about drainage?
Yeah, most tennis courts, it's going to be by surface drainage primarily, and then of course, if you had a heavy rain and you needed to squeegee it, you could do that. But internal drainage is, I would say, very, very little. In terms of how the surface is going to drain internally. And of course, you'd cultivate that just like you would other surfaces that are getting compacted to prevent it from getting, too hard and too compacted. But you're not going to really depend on internal drainage to get that court playable after a rain.
So everybody's learned by, I guess, experiencing others or doing it themselves and picking up tips and tricks. Why are we not have, if it's as popular as Wimbledon is, why do we not have hard research going on in these areas? Money.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we've been reaching out to various groups and various people trying to find funding to actually do research. And I'm really happy that the New England Turf Association or New England Turf Foundation has chosen to put some money into tennis research. We've gotten very little response from the U.S. Tennis Association. They fund a lot of things. They have a lot of programs, but it's mainly geared towards growing the game, youth programs, building courts in underserved areas. So they put money into things, but we haven't been able to convince them to put money into tennis, grass tennis research. We're also trying to work even with our local athletic department to try to convince them to build some grass tennis courts here at Arkansas as a unique recruiting tool, and maybe hosting a grass tennis college event. They're interested, but they haven't come up with the money yet either.
Right. It all comes down to money.
Yeah.
So if you had money, ideal situation, you get a grant from somebody. What are the areas that are needed in terms of investigating management?
Well, I would say that there's, especially in the transition zone and south, there's definitely a need for an better understanding of just the surfaces. I think there's more known in the north and in England about POA versus ryegrass versus bent and things like that. Again, more from a historical perspective about how those surfaces will play. But there's really very little information about transition zone grasses or even southern grasses that would be most suitable for playing tennis on. So that would certainly be one area of initial investigation, just to look at smoothness, firmness, bounce of the ball, things like that. That would be some real baseline information about grasses. One of the things that interests me, and maybe it's because I'm getting older, one of the things that I have noticed in my experience on lawn tennis courts is that it's an incredibly comfortable surface to play on. It's cool. It's soft under feet, so it's not as hard on the joints and the ankles, and I don't feel like I get as much fatigue on a lawn tennis court as I would on a clay or a hard surface. And so I think it would be really interesting from a research standpoint if we could work with a kinesiologist or somebody that really works with athlete interactions to look at how different surfaces might affect player fatigue, and especially for older players. I think it's a great surface for older players.
That's getting out of the idea of research part of it, because I think that's interesting. I mean, you're talking about Andy McNitt has the Center for Sports Surface Research, right? He focuses primarily on athletic fields and maybe a few other things, but he works with a lot of kinesiologists, and that's a big project. So there's potential here for you to have something big if you get the Tennis Association or somebody to sign on to it. But I was interested in hearing you say that the feel is different when you're playing. what is the difference between these courts? How does a tennis court, a grass tennis court, play differently than a clay court or any of the others? I just don't know. I'm not a tennis player.
Yeah. Well, the first thing you'll have to understand when you play on a grass tennis court is that just like on a golf green, you get the rub of the grain. You don't always get a perfect bounce. You can get weird bounces because the surface is not smooth like a piece of concrete or some other hard surface. So that's one of the things. But typically they tend to be a very fast surface. The ball is not a lot of friction as the ball hits it, and so you tend to get a very fast bounce on it. And oftentimes you don't get as high of a bounce on tennis, so you tend to get more low bounces. So you really have to adjust your game to be ready for bounces that tend to be more what I would consider to be a skid. The ball hits and kind of stays very low to the ground, doesn't bounce as high. It's also a great game for serve and volley, which basically means you serve the ball and then you charge the net. And then if the ball comes back over, you can then volley it and try to hit a drop shot or something close to the net because the grass is soft. If you hit an effective drop shot, it tends to hit with a resounding thud and it stops. And so it's a very effective way. That's one of the few ways I can score a point off of Karcher.
Who's better, you or Karcher?
Oh man, I've never even beat him at one set. He's way better than I am.
Wow. We need to cut his Achilles or something, you know. We get Colonel Spackler out there to take care of it. So I texted you. You have an intern out in Shinnecock, and I was close by, and I was texting you because I was at Maidstone. And they've got like 20-something grass tennis courts, and they had just Braze mode one of them and put it to ryegrass, probably similar to Wimbledon. But obviously that's a big part of that property. They started in tennis probably around that 1800s, late 1800s, and then golf became something that built up around them as opposed to tennis. How do you see this, as a potential amenity to other sports like golf? Instead of tennis driving golf, maybe golf could drive some tennis.
Well, certainly I think, based on our experience here at Arkansas, and again, we aren't lawn tennis researchers or scientists, so we didn't really know anything about it. We found that it was quite simple to if you've got a smooth surface, to turn it into a court. And so that really kind of gave us the idea that, maybe some of our golf courses, and many of them already have well-established tennis programs already, where they have, clay courts or hard surfaces that their tennis members play on, is that golf courses could potentially, build some grass courts as an additional amenity for their tennis membership, or to attract other just general members to the club that could then potentially also be golf members as well. And one of the reasons we think this really fits well is because, again, the equipment, the know-how, the chemical needs, those types of things, they're already there at the golf course. So the golf course doesn't have to go suddenly, hire a groundsman or buy a bunch of equipment or do anything to really move into the lawn tennis arena. They already have all the know-how and the equipment on site already to be able to do it. So, some golf course superintendents may say, I don't want anything to do with managing a tennis court, but certainly there might be some out there that might find that to be an interesting side project to do at their club.
Let me ask you this. How long does a tennis match, obviously you can go out and just hit the ball around for as long as you want, but if you're going to play a tennis match, how long does it take?
How long does it take? I'm sorry?
Yeah, like time-wise. Like how much commitment of time is it for you and Archer to go out and play tennis? 2 hours, 3 hours, an hour? What is it?
Yeah, I mean, typically we play between an hour and a half and 2 hours, and but you can get a good sweat going in an hour, no problem. So, again, one of the things that I like about tennis is that it's a good physical form of exercise. You get some real good exercise, burn a bunch of calories, and then you can get out and get it done in a couple of hours, and showered and back to whatever else you're wanting to do. So I'd say 2 hours is a pretty typical time frame for most tennis players.
The reason I asked is I was just at Oakmont for a USGA think tank meeting, and it was not just turf related, although the green section was heavily involved, but there were a lot of other divisions with USGA, and they're trying to, they're trying to get a handle or better understand from industry people where there's some openings or potential revenue generators for their member clubs. And I'm wondering if you spun it as a way to have an additional amenity, not just golf, you could actually get, probably not, but if you could actually get the USGA to fund something related to tennis because their member clubs, may have that or may be interested in having that as an alternate amenity for their members.
Yeah, I like it. It's a good idea. It might be something worth visiting with somebody, probably not maybe in the green section, but maybe higher up the food chain in the USGA to see if it's a, I don't know, where do they stand on things like foot golf and some of these other sports? Are they?
I don't know. I think at this point they're just trying to get people reinvigorated around golf. And I think one of the things that came out of that meeting was what is the most important aspect of a golf course. And we went through everything from food and beverage to conditions of the course. Conditions of the course was probably 1 or 2, and length of round was 1 or 2. Like they were like a close second, first and second. And so, to me, I just don't have 5 hours to get out on a golf course and play. But tennis, which is physical, even more physical than golf, which is great, and you can spend 2 hours and get a pretty good workout in and have some fun. It seems like a good alternative, as an additional thing to have at a club.
Mm-hmm. Well, and like I said, I know in Pennsylvania you have lots of golf clubs that have really, really strong tennis programs. So again, it's already out there, and I mean you even have a couple of I think is it Philadelphia Cricket and Marion Cricket are both. Is Marion Cricket, do they have golf as well, or is that just tennis?
I don't know what Marion. Tom, do you know that? I know Philly Cricket has tons of grass, like a whole tennis section. I mean, it's pretty large. I don't know about Marion, if that's a merger for Marion Golf Club or if I don't know.
So anyway, I'm sure you've got a lot of other clubs in the state that already have tennis programs. So again, it's just a matter of do they view that additional amenity would be something that might attract new members or bring more members to the club on a regular basis.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how many of these places that have tennis though have grass tennis courts. And I think when you think about managing a putting green and the intensity that goes into it, it probably, like you said, it probably scares either a lot of superintendents or from a financial standpoint, it scares a lot of clubs. Do you have any idea what the maintenance costs on a grass tennis court would be relative to a hard surface?
Now you should have given me that question yesterday. I would have found out, but I have no idea. I could ask.
I assume it's more expensive, but I don't know.
Yeah.
But if you have the benefits of a softer surface and easier on your legs for people that are more senior, that could potentially be an added benefit that would be worth the cost. So.
Yeah. Let me show you a couple of pictures here. I think this is kind of interesting. This is something that we have seen at several clubs, and you may have seen this at Maidstone when you were there. Again, you see this kind of wear on the court, and obviously going out there and trying to seed those areas, while it's still being used is very difficult. But one of the things that we've seen at a number of clubs is basically they have this huge lawn area that are the tennis courts, and so they can pull the nets and they can basically mow it. It's just this big, huge, flat, turf surface. But the way the courts are set up is that basically the courts are side by side, like you see in this picture I've got here, and the lighter green shows the active court, and then there's a resting court that basically inside the service boxes is not being used, or the service line on the resting court, but they share the doubles alley. So the long doubles alley are basically from one court. When you move the court over, it's the same doubles alley that you've been using because you get very little wear there. And so basically after you start seeing wear on these active courts, then you basically just move the courts like this. And so now you have the active courts or resting courts, which allows you to reseed or cultivate or whatever you need to do to get those courts back in play. And the courts that have been resting are now your active courts. And so this is a picture from Royal Sydney that we took, and this kind of shows this. So the where you see the net here is the active court, and then the taller cut grass that you're seeing here is actually the court that they were using, weeks prior, and it's now at rest.
Is that Bermuda grass?
That is a Bermuda grass base overseeded with perennial ryegrass. I know you visited there. Did you see their courts when you were there?
I saw them, but I didn't walk on them. I just kind of glanced over at them.
You need to start going over and looking at the tennis courts a little closer.
I know, it's interesting. I mean, my interest is obviously in golf, but it's really in managing high maintenance surfaces more than anything. And so, yeah, it would be cool to find space and do something similar to what you're doing, and but in the cool season grasses, and kind of look at some of those practices. I just don't know enough about it, and it's like you do research in golf, but you don't play golf. Well, like, there's a lot of things that nuances that by playing you know, and by not playing tennis, I don't know, and it's the worst. I've played once, and I can barely get the ball over the net. I was like the worst person to play with. So I think we kind of covered it. I mean, I really wanted to kind of hear a little bit about the history and where your thoughts were in terms of where the research is going or could go. I guess in the last couple minutes, I'll give you some final words. Like, ideal situation, what do you think? What would it be for you in terms of doing some research or enhancing your game of tennis or bringing it as a club to as an amenity to a club? Where do you see this going?
Well, certainly, like I said, we would love to do some research on it. I mean, there's just, I think, all kinds of interesting things that could be studied in terms of grass tennis. But as we've already discussed, that's going to take some money from someone. Maybe we just need to, be courting Serena Williams or something to see if we can get her to give us $1 million to study grass tennis. But we've been met with pretty significant resistance everywhere that we've turned so far. I don't want to say resistance, just kind of apathy about it. Not really something that people view as a valid venture. So we may just be dreaming, and it may not ever happen. But it's okay. It's been it's been something fun to fool around with.
Well, at a minimum, you have an awesome place to play tennis that you don't have to pay for. If you just get some students there to collect balls for you, you'd have it perfect. I want like a scorer's chair, so you have that right next to the official's chair, and people there to collect the balls. And then we're gonna make a video of you doing that. It's gonna be great.
Okay, now I'm gonna share one last screen here, just so people know you actually can play lawn tennis in the United States. Okay, so these are all public facilities that you can go and either play or pay and play. And so I've played on, I think, just one of these, the International Tennis Hall of Fame up in Newport. This is actually a picture of it in the background here. But there's a couple of interesting ones out there. There's the All Iowa Lawn Tennis Club in Charles City, Iowa, and Wimbledon. A guy named Don built that out in Baker City, Oregon, which is in the middle of nowhere. But you can go there and play on Wimbledon's court and enjoy some lawn tennis. So even a recreational player doesn't have to be a member of Longwood Cricket or Philadelphia Cricket or Maidstone. You can get out there and find a grass tennis court in the United States.
Oh, I can see the uproar now, where you have people complaining about the conditions aren't as good as they are. It's so core. It's a public facility, but that is interesting though. Like I think that it would bring. I don't know. Like I like the idea of playing on a natural surface as opposed to like a hard court. But again, I'm lazy and don't play. But we do have Mike McKenna coming on here on our next episode, July 11th. So maybe I'll put in a good word for you to have some funding from the USGA support this cause.
That'd be good. I'll just throw it out there to all of my turf friends. If you want to come try out a lawn tennis court, come visit us in Fayetteville, and we'd be happy to get out there and hit some balls around with you.
What we need to do is we need to host a turf conference, some kind of like agronomy conference for academics at Fayetteville, and then we can go out there and have a match, have a tournament.
I was born and raised in Charles City, Iowa.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I'll be there over the 4th of July.
You can
And
play.
I've been out to the grass tennis courts several times.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, he's a great guy. You know, learned by the seat of his pants how to deal with it, and so he's got Poa annua and ryegrass and a little bit of everything, but he's having a great time, and a lot of people are enthused. I mean, this is a town with 6,000 people in it.
Right.
I don't know if you've been there or not, but
I haven't, but I've read about it on his website, and yeah, I could tell it's a small town.
oh yeah, he's done a great job there.
Yeah.
But you know, even as small as it is, he has the same issues, which I think are pretty much focused on mechanical stress and wear, particularly on baselines and so forth. And I think that's the inroad into making a difference when it comes to play on grass, particularly a sport that tends to work itself out right in the same place all the time. It's somewhat like soccer, lacrosse, field hockey. They wear out in front of the goal and the net, and it takes a completely different management system in those areas. And you know, they're small, but they're very demanding in terms of what you can do about it.
So Tom, does he use this resting court method, or does he just have a couple of courts and he plays on them all the time?
Yeah. He doesn't rest anything.
Yeah.
That's probably a good thing. It means he's got a lot of people wanting to play, but it makes it difficult. I know at Maidstone, like they had 3 long courts. Well, courts. And they had several courts stacked next to each other, but they had 3 rows, and their rotation was like from one set to the next. So not like courts next to each other, but a whole row of probably 10 courts or 8 courts. They'd rest those and then just kind of shift around, which obviously is probably important. But yeah, it boggles my mind. There's a lot that goes into this that I just don't think about. But I could easily see where there would be a lot of research areas to be funded. So we'll tweet out to the U.S. Lawn Tennis Association or the Tennis Association or whoever it would be, and maybe get some of them to watch this video this week during Wimbledon, and we'll see. Maybe they'll be calling you, knocking your door down, waiting for you wedding.
I hope you're right, John.
Yeah,
you're right.
All right. Well, I think that was good. It was a good introduction to this, and I'll be interested after you've got a little bit of research, going on your plots to see kind of what you've found out just from what you're doing there and how you're managing. But I want to thank you for spending the time with us and sharing your background in tennis. And it's good. It was a good gift from golf.
No, I want to thank Neil Stubley for giving me this nice Slazenger tennis ball with the Wimbledon logo on it last year at the New England show, and I proudly display it here in my office.
Nice. Have you been over to Wimbledon?
I have not. No, my interest in tennis. I haven't been to the UK since I got interested in tennis, but when I go, I promise you, I will go there.
Well, with the exchange rates right now, it's probably a good time to go. Brexit's making it very good for an American traveler to be in the UK right now. So.
We need to. We talked about this. We need to go do a live show from Wimbledon next year.
Sounds awesome. Let's do it. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. I do want to say, everybody go follow Mike on Twitter. That's Beth. Arkansas Turf, right?
That's correct.
Arkansas Turf on Twitter. And Tom, what's your Twitter?
I don't have one.
He has one because I've seen it, but I think his wife set that up for him. Follow me at iTweetTurf on Twitter as well. So I will put a plug in. Mike Tenna will be our next guest from the USGA. He'll be here on July 11th with our next show, and maybe we'll discuss the potential for some of the unusual or outside funding, similar to like tennis at a golf club or a member club, as well as all the other things they have going on. So. with that, I'm going to sign off. Mike, thanks. Tom, thank you.
Yeah.
See you next
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for having me.